Well, hello and welcome to the second of our CPX Conversations in this series. Last time we heard from Andy Crouch. He was talking about technology and its impact on us and on our humanity. If you missed that, you can catch up on it. And this time we have our very own Justine Toh, whose book Achievement Addiction, which I have in my hand, is just out. Hey, Justine.
Hey, how are you?
This is a great book, Justine, and you are an excellent cultural critic. That's kind of your thing. You're very good at illuminating things about our culture that we might be only a little bit aware of or perhaps not at all, and helping us to think through the sort of implications of those things. And I have to say that skill is very much on display in this book. Now, in Achievement Addiction, you're trying to challenge the way that we think about success and a sort of a compulsive need to achieve. And I know it's sort of a little bit of the answer to this, but I want to ask you, for other people, what made you choose this topic?
Yeah, well, I myself have a bit of a conflicted relationship with success and achievement. I grew up in an Asian family, surprise, and it was one where tiger parenting was kind of a thing. So it was a sense of I needed to get into a selective school, I needed to come first in my class, I needed to get high marks, and this was how it felt as though that I would be accepted and I would belong in this family if I was a high achiever. So that look, I'm really grateful for that kind of background to a degree. I think it does help you try hard, and it does that produces good results. But it also gives me a unique insight, I guess, into the harms, I suppose, of thinking that your self-worth and your acceptance is contingent on you being a really high achiever and getting good marks, really. It's kind of really sad, you know. I'm
Yes.
long out of school and yet still, in some ways, that student.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about that in your book. There's a lot of personal experience for you in this, and you're sort of alerting people to some of the dangers. Now, one of the problems you identify here is that on the one hand, we kind of tell ourselves and our kids especially to never give up, to try hard, that good things come through persistence and hard work. And these, I think you will say, are good messages, but we also want to say, and that's where we get into difficulty, that our abilities, our achievements are not the things that establish who we are, that we're valued for things other than that. And it feels like there's an apparent contradiction there. That's part of what you're sort of prosecuting here.
Yeah, that's right. I think it is true that all of us love the people in our lives, not for what they do, but just because we love them and because of who they are. And that's far more than what they can produce on a report card, or if they come first in an exam or a sporting match or whatever. But I also think that our educational system is kind of built around this way of assigning marks and as a way to kind of work out who's going to be at the top, right? And this is also how we distribute rewards in our wider culture when it comes to earning salaries and that sort of thing as well. So there's just these two competing things at the one time. Yes, you are loved and valued beyond what you're worth on paper, but we spend all this time kind of assigning external, often numerical numbers to people in order to try and understand the value of their contributions as well. And so, like, of course, things are going to get confused and we're going to get conflicted. And we're going to think that in some cases, a good resume is the same as being a good person when it absolutely is not.
Yeah, a lot of what you look at here is the way in which even things that aren't spoken about overtly, in your case they kind of were, but not always, right? So there's these messages we're absorbing all the time that your worth comes from these sort of measurable outcomes. And that can become a problem.
It really can. I think it's also really interesting where if you were to, I know we can't go out right now, but if we were able to go out, if we weren't out of lockdown, and you might meet someone for the first time, a very quick question you would come to ask someone is, what do you do for a living? Which is really interesting. You try having that in exchange with someone and avoid actually saying what you do for a living, because what you do for a living is an immediate way to kind of put you in a particular hierarchy.
Yeah.
And then another one might be, where do you live? Again, your postcode says a lot about your success and otherwise in life. So I'm just really conscious that, middle class people do this a lot. Look at achievements as a way to kind of establish their worth and their credentials in the world. And I think that's good, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I think we don't often call out the harms of that kind of system as well.
Let's think about what might have been perhaps a little harmful for you when you were experiencing this environment where you felt like, for all sorts of reasons, that your worth really did depend on how you were able to achieve and be at the top of your cohort and all that sort of stuff. What was it like for you and the people around you, perhaps, too?
Well, it's not great because, and look, this is something that can go long after school as well. If you think that your worth boils down to your ATAR, for example, that it's not your ability on that day with those questions that's actually being tested, but you yourself, then you'll think that everything is riding on your final exams with school. But, long after school, Simon, that I write for a living, sometimes it can often feel as though you're only as good as your last article and, where that article went or where it didn't go. And so
It was a good one, by the way.
thank you. Well, I'm good. I'm safe for now, right? So, but
You're safe, yeah. You feel good about yourself
yeah,
for a
that's
bit
right.
longer.
Yeah. But it's just a really bad way to kind of understand yourself, to always feel like you're constantly prosecuting your worth. Do you know what I mean? Like you can never settle and relax into the, okay, I'm okay. The stuff that I do does not need to operate from a place of insecurity or lack. It could actually be a place of joy and interest and curiosity. Like, imagine that. Gosh, shouldn't that be what drives the work that we do? Or shouldn't that be a big thing, hopefully? And in terms of the harms of other people, I think it's not great if you've got someone in your life who is a bit of an achievement addict. It's not great to see them torture themselves as well, because it's that crazy thing where you can see that that person is far more than their achievements, whatever, but they won't believe what you have to say. And no matter what you say, the more and more they're going to just reconfirm in their head what they believe is true. And so I think that is can be a real frustration for people who have an achievement addict in their lives. Yeah.
Now, Justine, you take on this notion of the tiger parent, and it's largely from your own experience. Now, there's a need for a bit of sensitivity here, but I think you pull it off.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. It was a bit of a delicate dance for a while. And that's because in Sydney and Melbourne, at least, there can be quite a bit of unease, I suppose, and maybe a bit of resentment at Asian parents, Asian migrant parents, and their high achieving offspring who look like they are maxing out all the places at selective schools. Also, there's a lot of coaching that goes on. I myself had a bit of coaching in high school, but I hear that, but from what I understand, it's far more intense nowadays. And so, yeah, people feel a great deal of unease at this situation. And I heard recently that James Roos Agricultural High School, a high school in Sydney, has topped the HSC for the last 25 years, and yet almost a third of students who are offered placements to that school turn it down. And so this kind of doesn't make sense, right? This school is known to get fantastic results, and yet not everyone wants to go there. And I remember reading that perhaps that's to do with perceptions that because so many Asian students go there, that it's an academic hothouse environment. And families just don't want that for their kids. And so that's just a picture of the kind of angst, I suppose, around the question of Asians and achievement. And so that was the kind of context that's facing me. And I want to say some fairly strong things about achievement as well as reflecting on my own background, but also not licensing racism. The last thing I want is for people to do those Asians and then insert whatever line. And also, I want people to not say that, also, apart from it being racist, but because we live in such an achievement-oriented culture, that I think everyone is doing some version of what those Asians are doing, right? They're trying to make something of themselves. They are doing whatever they can to best position themselves for future success. And so that's why I argue that in an achievement oriented society such as ours, everyone is kind of Asian. This is a problem not just for people over there, those Asians, but it's a problem for all of us.
And Justine, this spills over into all sorts of areas, doesn't it?
It really does, like right now I'm wearing a Fitbit and I don't think I'm going to get up to my daily step count. But also, the number of followers we have on social media, how many times are people going to like my post? I think that really is a way that we measure ourselves as well. Let's be honest, the kind of car that you drive, I make a joke about how I've got a hybrid, so I feel a little bit like, oh yeah, doing my bit for the planet. And
It's superior.
yeah, that's right. But also things like, billable hours, performance reviews, all these ways we're putting numbers against ourselves in all sorts of ways. But there's also like the kinds of clothes that we wear, and for people more in my type of like neck of the woods, it's about what kind of great little backdrop can you assemble from your op shop buys, right? So it's like it's a kind of eclectic. How do you kind of try and it's a way of gaining status of some kind, again, this is not an overt number that we're kind of measuring ourselves by, but it's a way of trying to show that we know what we're doing and we can do this thing well.
Well, it's a very dominant, sort of pervasive mindset that you're challenging here. I remember you noting Joe Hockey a few years ago, who was then the federal treasurer, making the distinction between leaners and lifters. And why did that stand out for you?
Well, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because we get the sense here that, I mean, he says that Australia is a nation of lifters, not leaners, as in Australia is a community of people who contribute to the public good and not take from it. And so you're suddenly like, oh man, you're looking over your shoulder. Am I a lifter or am I a leaner in this equation? And it does make you think at different parts of life, maybe, you are going to be a leaner. I was certainly a leaner when I was born. I will probably be a leaner, at the other end of my life as well. Are we trying to say that that's not okay? It's that, is that not good? I think this has real, if you unfold the implications of that kind of thinking and push it to its extreme, does that mean that if I'm a leaner, that I make no contribution at all, or that my contribution may only be that I can lean? And is that a drain on public resources? Am I a burden on people? Like, what does that do to someone to kind of try and understand who they are? And this is slightly related but different as well. But like, think about how after the Olympics, a lot of athletes have really struggled to work out who they are after Olympic glory has long gone, right? There's been very highly publicized struggles with addiction, with other kind of relationship breakdown and so on. And I think it really is because people who have been at the top of their game for so long have now found themselves in a position where they're not able to lift, so to speak, but now find themselves not a lifter. And what does that do to their identity? They fall apart. So I think that these are questions that we should be thinking about and trying to map across different fields in order to understand how pervasive the pressure to achieve is, but also how destructive it can be to our souls, I will say.
Yeah, it's very much a question of identity that you're picking up on here. Now, you're right about the concept of grace, a central kind of concept in Christianity, as a way of sort of something that can undercut or subvert achievement addiction. That was a really important part of the book.
It really was. I think when it comes to achievement addiction, you're always looking to yourself and your own efforts, your own will in kind of mustering up the strength and the perseverance in order to apply yourself to a particular task. And in the end, it's an I did it myself. I'm the one who picked myself up by the bootstraps, whatever, and I kind of got myself to the finish line. And yet the idea of grace, or the idea that everything that we have is a gift and that has been given to us, is a profoundly challenging idea, because it's like, well, even being born into a family who values achievement and pushes you to strive and so on, and even developing that kind of work ethic, being in different environments, it could be a school or having a teacher who was really encouraging and nurturing of you, all of that you did nothing to earn. And I think that it's a really powerful corrective to this idea that I've done all of this and I can kind of, maybe I can look down on others, or I can congratulate myself for my hard work. If we come at it from the posture of grace and gratitude even for what we've been given, it changes the game entirely. It's suddenly less about, look what I've done, and more about, look what has been given to me, or look where I found myself. I'm at a table at which I did not spread in all sorts of ways. And, like, I think saying thank you to the people who are hosting us in terms of that spread that we find ourselves at, or I guess in an ultimate sense, living in a world where we're able to be thankful for the opportunities that we've been given, is a really powerful way that we can lean into that grace.
Yes, and when I read it, I was struck by the fact that in resting, in a sense, in that grace, that could, perhaps ironically, be a really motivating thing too, to be engaging with the world in very productive, kind of generous ways.
Yeah, do you know, some people were, someone was saying to me, because I was asked to write about achievement addiction in relation to a Bible series. And then someone's like, well, what about Sabbath? The idea that you would rest on a particular day. And I was like, I forgot about that. um, and I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, that, I mean, the Sabbath kind of comes from this idea that on the seventh day of creation, God rested from all the work that he had done. He'd spent all the rest of the past 6 days creating, and on the seventh day decided to rest and enjoy. And that is such an incredible thing to think about. Like, God, if anything, would be the most powerful, the person with the most ability, right? An endless to-do list could go on into infinity, and he could tick all of that off and feel great about it, right? And yet, the story that we get offered in the Bible is one where God puts down his, well, I want to say tool brushes, but I don't know what he was using, and actually just decides to enjoy what there is. I think that's a really good reminder that the point of life is not the endless striving, and particularly not the endless striving for your significance, but a real desire to rest and receive, and to know that reality is far more than the sum of our efforts. I think that's a good reminder for everyone.
Yeah, it's putting all the different aspects of life in their appropriate place. And the Sabbath, which is probably not broadly understood, or people loving that idea, it is a very interesting kind of concept, perhaps a gift to people who live very frantic modern lives, in fact.
Absolutely. 24/7. You could never sleep if you never wanted to. You could work from, like by the time you're old enough until you die. You could do that. And yet this constant reminder that maybe every 7 days it's good to stop and rest is a very, very radical idea.
Well, Justine, have you been healed of your achievement addiction?
I at least know that I have a problem now.
It's the first step, isn't it? We're working on that.
I have self-awareness, and I know where I need to go to get healed. So I think that's progress.
Absolutely, I think it is too. The book, as I say, Achievement Addiction, it's out now. It's a great read. I think it's going to be helpful to lots of people, certainly helpful to me. Great to talk to you, Justine.
Thanks, great to be with you.